August 1192. The Third Crusade rages in the Holy Land. Richard the Lionheart has retaken most of the Palestinian coast, but he's just withdrawn from a march on Jerusalem. Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, sees an opportunity to strike back. Having endured a series of defeats at the hands of Richard the Lionheart, Saladin is determined to seize the advantage and drive the Crusaders from the coast. The Sultan's plan: attack the port city of Jaffa. However, when Saladin launches his army, Richard strikes back, and more quickly than even the Sultan could have anticipated. The results of this crucial showdown at Jaffa in 1192 will determine the outcome of the Third Crusade. In the summer of 1192, the Third Crusade reaches an impasse. In July, King Richard declines to attack Jerusalem, which is held by Saladin. At this point, Richard has retaken much of the Palestinian coast, but Richard's refusal to besiege Jerusalem highlights his dependence on his fleet for support and shows that Saladin is in firm control of the hinterland. By now, the war has gone on for years, and both the Christians and the Muslims long for an end to the hostilities. Richard asks for terms. The Sultan sends his brother al-Adil to ask Richard to demolish Ashkelon, a coastal fortress on the doorstep of Egypt. Richard refuses. He wants the Sultan to acknowledge Christian control of the coast, including Ashkelon. Al-Adil returns to his brother with the report that the English king refuses to demolish even a single stone of Ashkelon. Meanwhile, Richard strengthens Ashkelon's defenses. The war must go on. Toward the end of July, Saladin hears that Richard is at Acre, the chief city of the Crusaders. Richard is planning to besiege Beirut. Saladin decides to counter this move by striking at Richard's southern lands. Jaffa has been newly restored and garrisoned by the Lionheart, located within striking distance of Jerusalem. Jaffa is an important site. If Saladin can capture it, he will cut Richard's lands in two and threaten the Christian position in Palestine. In the final days of July, Saladin gathers his army and moves toward Jaffa. Meanwhile, at Acre, Richard is with his army preparing to besiege Beirut when he receives word that Saladin is advancing on Jaffa. Quickly, Richard assembles his war council. He instructs his nephew, Henry of Champagne, and the Grand Master of the Knights Templar to assemble the Crusader forces and march down the coast from Acre to Jaffa. Meanwhile, Richard himself, with a small detachment, sets off with his fleet for Jaffa. Richard knows that time is of the essence. He doesn't want to wait for the land army. He wants to get to Jaffa as soon as possible. July 28, Saladin arrives in full strength before the walls of Jaffa. He divides his army, placing the right wing under his son al-Athir and the left wing under his brother al-Adil, while he commands from the center. The Sultan fully besieges the Christian stronghold. Muslim sappers begin working to undermine the walls. Jaffa's defenders are in a difficult situation. Their numbers are few, but the city is well defended with newly built walls and towers. Over the coming days, the fighting is fierce. Saladin's troops manage to collapse part of the curtain wall, but the Christians build a huge fire in the breach, preventing the Muslim troops from crossing over. Ibn-Shaddad, Saladin's servant and biographer, writes admirably of the courage of the Christian defenders. He says the Christians left open the gates and stood in formation, fighting in front of the gates. By July 31st, Saladin's forces inflict even more damage on Jaffa's walls. The Christians send the Knight Abderrahmans and Bishop Randolph of Bethlehem as emissaries to the Sultan. Saladin grants terms. He will allow the Christians to ransom their lives if they'll relinquish Jaffa. The Christian garrison withdraws to the citadel to await the Sultan's agents, while Muslim troops enter the town and put it to sack. By morning, Saladin's camp is abuzz with rumor that King Richard is on his way with a fleet. The Sultan is eager to get the Christians out of the citadel. He sends ibn-Shaddad and his son al-Athir to collect ransoms from the garrison and remove them from the citadel. Meanwhile, Saladin is confident that his troops on the shore can prevent the Lionheart from making a landing. On the morning of August 1st, Richard's first ships begin to appear off the coast, announcing their arrival with the braying of trumpets. Ibn-Shaddad approaches the citadel and demands that the garrison evacuate. The Christians agree. 47 horsemen emerge. Ibn-Shaddad collects ransoms from each of them, documents their belongings, and sends them on their way. However, at this point, the defenders realize that Christian ships have appeared on the sea, and they decide to hold out. Ibn-Shaddad says that he watched as the garrison troops climbed up onto the walls with their shields. Seeing this, Ibn-Shaddad realizes that the situation has changed dramatically. He turns to one of his comrades and says, "Take care, the enemy have changed their minds." In the next moment, Frankish horsemen emerge from the citadel and charge through the Muslim troops standing outside. Ibn-Shaddad's first-hand account of these events is quite gripping. Meanwhile, Richard the Lionheart's fleet approaches the shore of Jaffa. At first, the king and his companions are distraught, for Saladin's flags are flying over the city. It's a devastating sight. They're too late. Jaffa has already fallen. However, the king and his men are amazed when they catch sight of a man swimming desperately through the waves toward the ships. Richard's knights help bring the man aboard. It's a priest, and he has risked his life to deliver a message to the king. "Sire," says the priest, "the town has fallen, but the Christians hold out in the citadel. Please, go to their aid now before it's too late." When Richard hears this, he grabs his Danish axe, raises it high, and shouts, "By God's calves, Saladin will never take the Christians." With a small force of knights and archers, Richard jumps into the surf and rushes onto the shore. Ibn-Shaddad personally witnessed this stunning amphibious assault and describes it in his biography of Saladin. The King of England hastened to gain the shore. The first galley to deliver its men on land was his. He was red-haired, his tunic was red, and his banner was red, as was his device. In only a short time, all the men from the galleys had disembarked in the harbor. All this went on before my eyes. They then charged the Muslims, who withdrew before them and were cleared out of the harbor. I was on horseback, so I galloped as far as the Sultan and gave him the news. The two envoys were with him, and he had just taken his pen in his hand to write their guarantee of safe conduct. I whispered in his ear what had happened, so he stopped writing and kept them busy in conversation. Hardly a moment later, the Muslims came fleeing toward the Sultan, who shouted to those about him, and all mounted their horses. He seized the envoys and ordered the baggage train and the camp to move back to Yazur. This is a truly remarkable moment in military history. Richard the Lionheart, accompanied by a small force, hurls back Saladin's army from the shores of Jaffa. The king himself is at the forefront, wielding his axe against enemy troops. Having secured the shore, the Crusaders now enter Jaffa itself. Richard is the first to set foot in the city, charging up a spiral stairway through a Templar house. With his knights, the king storms through the narrow streets, battling hand-to-hand with enemy troops. Soon, the town is cleared of Muslim forces. Richard's men mount the walls, throwing down Saladin's banners and raising up the standard of the Lionheart. Euphoric, the Christians emerge from the citadel to cheer their king. The Lionheart has triumphed. Jaffa is saved. Richard occupies the position Saladin had held, while the Sultan himself beats a hasty retreat. Saladin had all but reduced Jaffa, only to have Richard arrive and totally reverse the situation. The riveting accounts from the primary sources make these events all the more alive to us. It is fascinating that the most powerful and vivid account of these events comes from Saladin's own chronicler, Ibn-Shaddad, who personally watched the Lionheart in action. Richard now has his men break up pieces of his ships to create a wooden fortification before Jaffa. Meanwhile, Saladin withdraws to Ramla. Having secured Jaffa, Richard dispatches a messenger to Saladin, asking him to send envoys. Saladin sends his brother al-Adil's chamberlain, Abu Bakr, and several Mamluks to meet with King Richard. Already, Richard knows Abu Bakr and his companions well from past meetings with al-Adil. Indeed, Richard is on friendly terms with this group of Muslim warriors. Ibn-Shaddad describes their meeting. King Richard had made friends with several of the elite Mamluks and had knighted some of them. He was on very good terms with them as they met with him on numerous occasions. When the group mentioned came before him, he was both serious and lighthearted. He said, "This sultan of yours is a great man. Islam has no mightier prince on earth than him. How is it he departed merely because I had arrived? By God, I had not even put on my hauberk and was not ready for anything. On my feet I wore only sea boots. Why did he withdraw?" Here, Ibn-Shaddad provides us with a fascinating glimpse into the subtleties of the Lionheart's personality. Richard is a highly capable diplomat. Simultaneously, he compliments Saladin while emphasizing his own capability in battle and the extent of his victory at Jaffa. All this is to encourage the Sultan to come to terms. It's also fascinating that a great Crusader king could strike up a certain friendship with Abu Bakr and other emirs and Mamluks. Before Abu Bakr departs, Richard asks him to greet the Sultan for him and to urge the Sultan to come to a peace. Meanwhile, at Ramla, the Sultan learns that Henry of Champagne and the Templars are moving south from Acre to reinforce the Lionheart. Saladin decides that he might still turn defeat into victory. Jaffa is damaged, and Richard holds it with only a small force. If the Muslims attack quickly, they might overwhelm the king before the main Christian army arrives. On August 3rd, Saladin departs with his army for Jaffa. But King Richard is preparing for this. The Lionheart organizes his small force to hold the city. The Gesta Regis Ricardi, written by one of Richard's followers, describes the king's formation. Amid wooden palisades, Richard arranges the infantry in a shield wall. Each man holds a long spear aimed forward with the blunt end planted in the ground. Between each of these spearmen, Richard places a crossbowman. Each crossbowman is assigned 2 crossbows and an assistant to help him load one bow while he himself shoots the other bow. Meanwhile, the king himself leads a small cavalry force containing so few men that the Gesta names each of them individually. Incredibly, Richard is about to fight this battle with between 10 and 20 mounted knights. This is confirmed by Ibn-Shaddad. Saladin approaches Jaffa with a force of around 10,000 men. When he realizes that Richard's force is so small, he's exhilarated. Finally, the moment has come when he will crush the Lionheart. The Sultan has a fully equipped army, and Richard has less than 2,000 men, with less than 20 horses. The position of the Christians seems impossible. Immediately, Saladin launches the attack. However, as the Turkish horse archers rush at Richard's formation, the Christians hold firm. The Sultan's initial attacks are repulsed. Again, Ibn-Shaddad's description is powerful. The enemy stood firm and did not move from their positions. Like dogs of war, they snarled, willing to fight to the death. Our troops were frightened of them, dumbfounded by their steadfastness. The number of their cavalry was estimated at most as 17, and at the least as 9, and their foot was less than 1,000. Some said 300, and others more than that. The Sultan was greatly annoyed at this, and personally went around the divisions, urging them to attack, and promising them good rewards if they would. As the battle progresses, it becomes clear that Richard has made good use of his limited resources. Repeated attacks from the Turkish cavalry fail, and indeed, the Christian crossbowmen are picking off Saladin's riders with every charge. Soon, Saladin's troops fall back and refuse to obey the Sultan's orders to attack. This infuriates Saladin, who is horrified to see his army failing before such a small force. The Sultan rides up and down his ranks, demanding that his men fight, but they refuse. At this point, King Richard decides to attack. Leading his 10 or 20 horsemen, he charges the Sultan's lines. This is one of the Lionheart's finest moments. Despite being terribly outnumbered, Richard and his knights inflict serious damage on Saladin's army. The Gesta Regis Ricardi provides a vivid account of the action. The king and his men realized that the Saracens were not going to do anything else. When they were unable to bear this half-hearted and evasive strategy any longer, the king and those who had horses put spur to horse and with lances couched, charged powerfully into the thick of the enemy, throwing them down to the right and the left, emptying saddles of their riders and transfixing some of them. Richard's decision to charge is no accident. He recognizes the collapsing morale of Saladin's army and understands that the Sultan likely won't be able to counter a cavalry attack from the Christians, however small it may be. The king's charge further demoralizes the Muslim host. When it's all over, Richard does something to further expose Saladin's inability to control his own forces. Ibn-Shaddad describes it. The King of England took his lance that day and galloped from the far right wing to the far left, and nobody challenged him. The Sultan was enraged, turned his back on the fighting, and withdrew to Yazur. At this point, Saladin realizes the extent of his defeat. He calls for a retreat, and the Muslim army withdraws. Once again, Richard the Lionheart has won a great victory over Saladin. Indeed, one of the most remarkable victories in military history. Fortunately, the battle was carefully recorded by the chroniclers in both camps, who repeatedly confirm one another's details. We are fortunate that such a fascinating episode was so well documented. The Battle of Jaffa destroys Saladin's plan to dislodge King Richard from the coast. Jaffa is saved for the Crusaders. For Richard, this is a crucial victory. Had Saladin succeeded, the very position of the Christian domain in Syria-Palestine would have been threatened. Now that you've experienced this amazing battle, click on your screen to view the final video in our series on the Third Crusade, the results and aftermath of the Third Crusade. This video is also linked in the description below.